History books often paint the Medici family as brilliant patrons of art and science, the grand bankers of Florence, the power behind popes. But beneath the velvet cloaks and gilded palaces lay a brutal reality of power, ambition, and warfare. When the Medici wanted something, they took it. And sometimes their path to power, or their grip on it, involved some of the most savage and desperate sieges the Italian Renaissance ever witnessed. Get ready to dive into 6 terrifying stories where starvation, disease, and relentless violence reshaped cities and lives, all intertwined with the dynasty that shaped Florence. Number 6. Siege of Pitigliano, 1556. The War of Siena raged across Tuscany. Cosimo I de' Medici, Duke of Florence, was not content with merely capturing his old rival Siena. He wanted to consolidate his power, stamping out every last pocket of resistance. Pitigliano, a remote town perched dramatically on a volcanic tuff cliff, became one such target in 1556. It was a stronghold of the Orsini family, fierce rivals of the Medici, and held by Niccolo Orsini, a seasoned warrior. This town was seen as a refuge for anti-Medici exiles and a strategic link for French forces trying to disrupt Cosimo's growing dominion. Cosimo, allied with the powerful Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, decided Pitigliano had to fall. Cosimo's forces, a mix of Florentine and imperial troops, approached Pitigliano with heavy artillery. The town's natural defenses were formidable. The cliff face made direct assault almost impossible. Its narrow streets and ancient walls promised a bloody fight for any attacker. The Orsini defenders knew this, and they were prepared to resist. Niccolo Orsini, though outnumbered, was a master of defensive tactics. He had reinforced the existing medieval walls, stockpiled what supplies he could, and rallied the town's citizens. The people of Pitigliano, fiercely loyal to their Orsini lords, understood the stakes. They faced an enemy determined to crush their independence. The siege began with a relentless roar of cannons. Cosimo's engineers, skilled in the latest siege warfare techniques, began to set up their batteries. Huge stone balls and iron shots smashed into the ancient masonry, slowly chipping away at the town's defenses. The defenders responded with their own smaller cannons, firing back at the besiegers, trying to disrupt their positions and inflict casualties. Days turned into weeks. The bombardment was continuous, a constant thunder that shook the ground and rattled the nerves of everyone inside Pitigliano. Every direct hit sent showers of debris through the air, damaging homes and creating breaches in the outer walls. The Medici forces did not rely solely on cannon fire. They also attempted to dig trenches, inching closer to the walls. These trenches, often winding and deep, provided cover for soldiers approaching the fortifications. Skirmishes erupted daily as Orsini patrols tried to disrupt the trench digging, leading to desperate hand-to-hand combat in the muddy earth. Archers on both sides loosed volleys of arrows, and early firearms cracked, adding to the terrifying symphony of war. Supplies inside Pitigliano began to dwindle. The town, isolated by the besieging army, could not receive food or fresh water easily. The Orsini tried to conserve what they had, rationing food and water strictly. People ate less, and the children often went hungry first. Cosimo's strategy was one of attrition. He knew that even the strongest walls could not withstand hunger and thirst indefinitely. His forces systematically devastated the surrounding countryside, destroying crops, burning farms, and seizing any livestock they found. This ensured no relief could reach Pitigliano from outside. The suffering of the civilian population grew each day. Disease, a constant companion of siege warfare, began to spread through the crowded town. Dysentery and fevers became common, claiming lives among soldiers and civilians alike. The Orsini forces, already stretched thin, now had to deal with the sick and dying. The Medici commanders, reporting directly to Cosimo, pressed for a breakthrough. They ordered concentrated bombardments on specific sections of the wall, hoping to create a breach large enough for an assault. One attempt involved mining, where engineers dug tunnels under the walls, filling them with gunpowder and attempting to detonate them. These were dangerous operations. Sometimes the tunnels collapsed, burying the miners. Sometimes the defenders discovered the tunnels and countermined, leading to underground battles in the dark, suffocating earth. One such explosion rocked the town, tearing a section of the wall apart, but the Orsini defenders, though battered, quickly erected makeshift barricades to prevent an immediate breakthrough. And Niccolo Orsini rallied his men, encouraging them to hold on. He spoke of the Orsini honor and the independence of Pitigliano. He knew that surrender meant losing everything. However, the signs of despair were growing. The citizens, worn down by constant fear, hunger, and disease, looked to their lord for an end to the suffering. The walls, once formidable, were now pockmarked and crumbling in places. The sound of artillery was a constant reminder of their precarious situation. Reports reached Niccolo Orsini of other Orsini, strongholds falling or negotiating peace with Cosimo, further isolating Pitigliano. After months of relentless pressure, Niccolo Orsini understood that continued resistance would only lead to the complete destruction of his town and its people. With dwindling supplies, significant casualties, and no hope of relief, he reluctantly entered into negotiations with the Florentine and imperial commanders. The terms were harsh. Pitigliano was to be handed over to Cosimo I de' Medici. The Orsini family would lose their independent rule over the territory. The people of Pitigliano would become subjects of the Grand Duchy of Tuscany. This surrender marked a crucial step in Cosimo's campaign to consolidate his power and eliminate independent lordships in the region. The siege of Pitigliano, though not ending in a bloody sack, was a brutal, drawn-out affair that ground down the will of its defenders through overwhelming force, starvation, and relentless bombardment, securing another piece of territory for the expanding Medici dominion. Number 5. Siege of Montalcino 1553 to 1559. Following the devastating fall of Siena to Cosimo, the first de' Medici and his imperial allies, a beacon of desperate resistance, continued to burn brightly in the rugged Tuscan hills. This was Montalcino, a fortified hill town where surviving Sienese Republicans and anti-Medici exiles had fled. In 1553, they defiantly proclaimed the Republic of Siena in Montalcino, a symbol of their enduring independence against the growing power of Florence and the Holy Roman Empire. Cosimo I, now effectively Duke of Florence, understood that this last stronghold was a threat to his complete control over Tuscany. He was determined to extinguish this final flicker of Sienese liberty, no matter the cost. The Republic of Siena in Montalcino quickly organized itself, electing a council and rallying all available forces. They were a motley crew of professional soldiers, Sienese nobles, and desperate citizens, all united by a profound hatred for the Medici and a fierce love for their lost republic. Montalcino itself was a strong position. Its medieval walls, perched atop a hill, offered a commanding view of the surrounding landscape. Its fortress, a formidable structure, provided a final redoubt. However, they were isolated, cut off from most supplies, and facing the combined might of Cosimo's Florentine army and the imperial forces. The siege of Montalcino was not a single, continuous assault like some others. It was a prolonged, grueling war of attrition that stretched over 6 agonizing years. Cosimo's strategy was simple, yet devastating: choke the town into submission. His forces established a tight blockade around Montalcino, cutting off all supply routes. They systematically destroyed any remaining crops in the surrounding countryside. Wells and springs outside the town were either poisoned or guarded, denying the defenders access to fresh water. This meant that the people inside Montalcino would slowly starve and succumb to disease. Life inside Montalcino during these years became a living nightmare. Food supplies dwindled rapidly. Rations became pitifully small. Accounts from the time speak of people eating anything they could find: roots, leaves, wild herbs, and scavenged animal remains. Dogs and cats disappeared from the streets, consumed by the desperate populace. The sick and the elderly, already weakened by hunger, were particularly vulnerable. Disease, as always during prolonged sieges, spread like wildfire through the crowded town. Typhus, dysentery, and various fevers claimed lives almost daily. The makeshift hospitals overflowed, and many died without medical attention. The defenders, despite their desperate situation, showed incredible resilience. They organized daring sallies, swift attacks launched from the town gates, hoping to break through the blockade and seize supplies from the enemy. These sorties were often bloody, leading to fierce hand-to-hand combat outside the walls. Sometimes a small amount of food or ammunition would be captured, providing a temporary morale boost. But more often, these desperate attempts resulted in heavy casualties for the defenders, further depleting their already scarce numbers. The Medici and imperial forces, far superior in numbers and resources, quickly learned to anticipate these sallies, setting traps and ambushes. The psychological toll on the inhabitants was immense. The constant threat of attack, the gnawing hunger, the sight of dead bodies, and the ever-present fear of an imperial assault wore them down. Yet, the ideal of the Sienese Republic kept them going. They knew that if Montalcino fell, the spirit of independent Siena would be extinguished forever. They clung to the hope that France, their distant ally, would send a relief force, but such help rarely materialized in sufficient measure. Cosimo's forces, under commanders like Giangiacomo Medici, not related to the Florentine family, but a prominent general, and other imperial leaders, maintained relentless pressure. They built fortified camps around Montalcino, turning the siege into a permanent state of war. Artillery continued to pound the walls periodically, keeping the defenders on edge. While major assaults were rare due to Montalcino's strong position, the daily skirmishes, the constant threat of starvation, and the isolation were just as effective in breaking the spirit of the besieged. By 1559, after years of this brutal attrition, the situation inside Montalcino was dire beyond imagination. The population had been decimated by hunger and disease. The few remaining defenders were emaciated and exhausted. Their supplies were practically non-existent. The walls were still standing, but the people inside were dying. However, the end of the Republic of Siena in Montalcino came not from a final breach, but from a wider political shift. The Treaty of Cateau Cambresis, signed in April 1559, formally ended the long Italian wars between France and the Habsburgs. A key clause of the treaty stipulated that Montalcino would be handed over to Cosimo I de' Medici. The defenders of Montalcino, though heartbroken, had no choice but to accept the terms. They had held out for 6 years, a testament to their unwavering will, but now their cause was lost. On August 1st, 1559, the remaining Sienese Republicans marched out of Montalcino, leaving their last bastion behind. Their spirit of independence, though crushed, had shown remarkable resilience against the overwhelming might of the Medici and imperial forces. The long and agonizing siege of Montalcino effectively secured Cosimo I's control over all of Tuscany, a brutal but successful conquest that solidified his position as the Grand Duke. Number 4, Siege of Prato, 1512. The Medici family had been exiled from Florence for 18 years. Since 1494, when the ambitious King Charles VIII of France marched into Italy, Piero de' Medici, Lorenzo the Magnificent's son, had been unable to resist the French king's demands and was expelled from Florence. Florence had since become a republic, often torn by internal factions but fiercely proud of its independence. However, the Medici never gave up hope of returning. Their chance came in 1512, fueled by the powerful Pope Julius II, a determined and warlike pontiff who despised the Florentine Republic's alliance with France. Julius II, along with Spain and the Holy Roman Empire, formed the Holy League, aimed at expelling the French from Italy and, crucially for the Medici, restoring them to Florence. Giovanni de' Medici, the future Pope Leo X, and his brother Giuliano de' Medici, along with Spanish forces led by the experienced General Ramon de Cardona, marched into Tuscany. Their objective was clear: force Florence to abandon its French alliance and accept the return of the Medici. Florence, however, was wary of the Medici's return and refused the Holy League's demands. The Spanish army, known for its ferocity and discipline, decided to make an example of a nearby town, Prato, located just a few miles north of Florence. Prato was a strategically important town, guarding the main road to the Florentine capital. Its capture would send a terrifying message. Citizens of Prato, hearing of the approaching army, prepared for a siege. They had a small, poorly trained militia and some mercenary soldiers. Their fortifications, while ancient, were not designed to withstand a modern, powerful army equipped with heavy artillery. The Spanish and Allied forces quickly invested the town, surrounding it completely. The bombardment began almost immediately. Spanish cannons, much more powerful than anything Prato possessed, began to pound the medieval walls. Huge sections of stone and earth crumbled under the relentless barrage. The sound of explosions and the screams of the injured filled the air. On August 29th, 1512, after only a few days of bombardment, the Spanish breached a significant section of the wall near Porta al Seraglio. The defenders, though outnumbered and outgunned, fought valiantly, trying to repel the assault. But the Spanish veterans, hungry for plunder and reputation, poured through the gap. What followed was a massacre. The sack of Prato became infamous throughout Italy for its extreme brutality. The Spanish soldiers, many of whom were unpaid mercenaries, were let loose on the city with no restraint. Historians and contemporary accounts describe scenes of unimaginable horror. The sack lasted for days. The soldiers raped women and girls, regardless of age or social standing, often in front of their families. Men were tortured for information about hidden wealth, then killed. Children were not spared. Houses were systematically plundered. Anything of value was seized: gold, silver, jewels, art, and even simple household items. Churches, normally considered sanctuaries, were desecrated. Priests were murdered, nuns violated, and religious artifacts stolen or destroyed. The city's famous cathedral was looted, its sacred vestments ripped apart, its altars defiled. The streets of Prato ran red with blood. The cries of the victims echoed through the burning buildings. The stench of death and destruction hung heavy over the town. Estimates of the dead vary, but some accounts suggest that thousands of citizens, perhaps as many as 5,000 out of a population of around 15,000, were slaughtered. The Spanish soldiers moved through the town with impunity, engaging in widespread acts of cruelty. They not only killed, but maimed, disfigured, and tormented their victims. The sheer scale of the atrocities sent shivers down the spines of people across Italy. The Medici brothers, Giovanni and Giuliano, were with the Spanish army outside the walls. While they did not participate in the atrocities, the sack was carried out by the army that was fighting to restore them to power. The terror unleashed upon Prato was a deliberate message to Florence. Florence, hearing the horrifying news from its neighbor, understood the implication. The choice was: clear resistance meant suffering the same fate as Prato. The Florentine Republic, its will broken by the shocking brutality, capitulated. On September 14, 1512, the Medici formally returned to Florence. The sack of Prato was not a mere military victory. It was a psychological weapon, a chilling demonstration of the lengths to which the Medici's allies would go to ensure their restoration. The memory of Prato haunted Florence for generations, a grim reminder of the price of defying the powerful forces allied with the Medici. The brutal siege and subsequent sack of Prato secured the Medici's return, but at a cost that etched itself into the very fabric of Renaissance history, a testament to the ruthless side of their political ambition. Number 3. Siege of Volterra, 1472. In the heart of Tuscany, perched high on a hill overlooking fertile valleys, lay the ancient city of Volterra. For centuries, Volterra had maintained a degree of independence, a proud commune within the larger Florentine orbit. But in the 1470s, a valuable discovery threatened its autonomy-rich alum mines. The alum was a crucial mineral, essential for the European textile industry as a mordant to fix dyes. Control over alum mines meant immense wealth. of Florence under the cunning and ambitious Lorenzo de' Medici, known as the Magnificent, desperately wanted a monopoly on this lucrative resource. When a dispute arose between Volterra and Florence over the rights to the mines, Lorenzo saw his opportunity. Volterra, determined to protect its economic independence, resisted Florentine claims. Negotiations failed, and the situation escalated into open conflict. Lorenzo de' Medici, never one to shy away from asserting Florentine power, decided to bring Volterra to heel by force. He assembled a formidable army comprising Florentine citizens, mercenary companies, and allied forces. He placed this army under the command of one of the most respected condottieri or mercenary captains of the age, Federico da Montefeltro, the Duke of Urbino. Montefeltro was known for his military prowess, but also for his discipline. However, even the most disciplined armies, especially mercenary ones, could prove difficult to control when unleashed. The Florentine army marched on Volterra in the spring of 1472. The city, with its strong medieval walls and its hilltop position, presented a significant defensive challenge. Montefeltro's engineers immediately began to set up their artillery batteries. The cannons roared, sending heavy stone balls smashing into the walls, trying to create breaches. The defenders of Volterra, though outmatched in numbers and equipment, fought with courage, knowing that their liberty depended on their resistance. They repelled several assaults on the damaged sections of the walls. The siege was long and arduous. Weeks turned into months. Inside Volterra, food and water began to grow scarce. The constant bombardment took a heavy toll on the morale of the citizens. Disease, as it often did during prolonged sieges, began to spread, weakening the defenders and civilians alike. Volterra appealed for help from other Italian states, but no significant relief force arrived. Lorenzo de' Medici maintained relentless pressure, cutting off all supply routes and ensuring that Volterra was completely isolated. Eventually weakened by hunger, disease, and relentless bombardment, and seeing no hope of outside relief, the leaders of Volterra decided to negotiate a surrender. They sent envoys to Federico da Montefeltro seeking honorable terms. Montefeltro, known for his chivalry, agreed to generous conditions. The city would open its gates, but its citizens and their property would be protected. There would be no looting, no violence, no retribution. The Volterrans, exhausted but hopeful, accepted these terms. They believed they had secured their lives and their city's integrity through diplomacy. On June 18, 1472, the gates of Volterra were opened to the Florentine army. As Montefeltro's main forces entered, a terrible betrayal unfolded. The mercenary soldiers, many of whom had not been paid in full, and who felt cheated out of the plunder they expected from a conquered city, erupted in a wave of violence. They disregarded Montefeltro's orders and the terms of surrender. The sack of Volterra began. The city was subjected to a brutal and indiscriminate rampage. Homes were broken into, plundered of all valuables. While churches were desecrated, their altars stripped bare, their sacred vessels stolen or destroyed. The citizens who had believed themselves safe were subjected to horrific acts of violence. Men were murdered in the streets, often after being tortured for information about hidden wealth. Women were raped. The elderly and children were not spared. Fires broke out, consuming buildings and adding to the chaos and terror. The screams of the victims filled the once proud city. Federico da Montefeltro, horrified by the actions of his own troops, tried to intervene and restore order. He rode through the streets, striking down disobedient soldiers and attempting to protect the innocent. But the mercenary frenzy was too powerful to stop immediately. It took him several days and the execution of some of the most egregious offenders to bring the situation under control. By then, Volterra was ruined. Its wealth was gone, its population decimated, its buildings damaged, and its spirit broken. Lorenzo de' Medici, the architect of the campaign, expressed public regret over the sack, but his actions had secured Florence's control over the valuable alum mines, and Volterra's independence was crushed. The brutal siege and the subsequent betrayal and sack of Volterra served as a stark example of Medici power and their willingness to use overwhelming force, even at the cost of widespread suffering, to achieve their economic and political objectives. It marked a dark stain on Lorenzo's otherwise celebrated reign, revealing the ruthless underbelly of Florentine expansionism. Number 2. Siege of Siena, 1554 to 1555. Siena, a city of fierce independence and an ancient rival to Florence, stood as the last obstacle to Cosimo I de' Medici's ambition of creating a unified, powerful Grand Duchy of Tuscany. For centuries, these two republics had vied for supremacy in the region. By the mid-16th century, with Cosimo firmly established as Duke of Florence and allied with the mighty Habsburg Empire of Charles V and Philip II, Siena's days of freedom were numbered. Siena, traditionally aligned with France, became a flashpoint in the broader Italian wars. Cosimo, seizing the opportunity, declared war on Siena in 1552, portraying it as a French outpost in Italy. The stage was set for one of the most agonizing and brutal sieges in Renaissance history. The siege began in earnest in January 1554. Cosimo's Florentine army, bolstered by large contingents of imperial and Spanish troops, numbered over 20,000 men. The command was given to Gian Giacomo Medici, the Marquis of Marignano, a seasoned and ruthless general, though unrelated to the Florentine Medici family. Siena, meanwhile, prepared for a desperate defense. Its fortifications were strong, but its resources were limited. The city was defended by a mixed force of Sienese citizens, French mercenaries, and Italian exiles who opposed Cosimo, led by Piero Strozzi, a Florentine exile and bitter enemy of the Medici. From the outset, Marignano's strategy was one of total war and attrition. He aimed to completely isolate Siena, cutting off all supplies, and systematically starving the city into submission. His forces encircled Siena, establishing heavily fortified camps and blocking every road and path leading into the city. The surrounding countryside, Siena's lifeline, was systematically devastated. Fields were burned, wells poisoned, and any remaining food stores seized or destroyed. This created a desolate buffer zone around the city, ensuring no relief could reach the besieged. Life inside Siena quickly descended into a living hell. Food supplies, already limited, dwindled at an alarming rate. Rations were cut to barely sustainable levels and then further reduced. People began to eat anything they could find. Accounts from the time are horrific. Citizens resorted to eating roots, grass, and even leaves. Dogs, cats, and rats became a source of protein. There were reports of people consuming the hides of animals boiled to make them digestible, and even stories of cannibalism emerging from the deepest despair. The once bustling streets became quiet, filled with the gaunt figures of starving citizens. As starvation tightened its grip, disease spread unchecked. Typhus, dysentery, and other fevers ravaged the population. With weakened immune systems, people succumbed quickly. The sick and dying lay in the streets and homes, often without care. Burial parties struggled to keep up with the mounting dead, sometimes leaving bodies unburied, further fueling the spread of illness. The stench of death hung over the city. One of the most heart-wrenching aspects of the siege was the forced expulsions. To conserve food and prolong their resistance, the Sienese authorities made the agonizing decision to expel non-combatants from the city. Women, children, the elderly, and the sick were driven out of the gates, hoping they might find mercy from the besiegers. But Marignano's orders were clear: no one was to be allowed through his lines. Thousands of these desperate, starving people found themselves trapped in a terrifying no-man's land between the city walls and the imperial camps. They were denied entry back into Siena and denied passage through the besiegers' lines. Many died of hunger, exposure, or disease in full view of their families on the walls. Others were killed by imperial patrols. This grim spectacle served as a constant reminder to the defenders of the cruel fate that awaited them. The siege was not without its moments of intense combat. The defenders made desperate sallies, attempting to break the blockade and forage for food, often clashing violently with imperial troops. They launched daring attacks on enemy positions. But each attempt was met with overwhelming force, resulting in heavy casualties for the Sienese. Piero Strozzi, though suffering from a wound, inspired his men to incredible acts of defiance, but his efforts were ultimately futile against the systematic destruction wrought by the besiegers. After 15 months of unimaginable suffering, with no hope of relief and starvation claiming thousands of lives, Siena's remaining leaders understood that further resistance was pointless. The city was a ghost town, its population decimated. On April 17, 1555, Siena formally surrendered. The terms were harsh. The Sienese were permitted to leave with their lives, but their ancient republic was dissolved. Cosimo I de' Medici had achieved his goal. The fall of Siena was a testament to the brutal effectiveness of siege warfare in the 16th century. It resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands, overwhelmingly from starvation and disease. It marked the end of Siena's independence and its integration into the new Grand Duchy of Tuscany under Cosimo I. The siege of Siena stands as a chilling example of the lengths to which the Medici would go to expand and secure their power, turning a once vibrant city into a monument to suffering and conquest. Number 1. Siege of Florence, 1529 to 1530. The most significant and devastating siege involving the Medici, a conflict that forever changed the fate of Florence, was the brutal 10-month ordeal from October 1529 to August 1530. After the shocking sack of Rome in 1527 by Emperor Charles V's forces, Florence, ever resentful of Medici rule, seized the opportunity. The reigning Medici, including Pope Clement VII born Giulio de' Medici, were vulnerable. The Florentines once again expelled their powerful banking family and joyfully declared a republic. This was a direct challenge to Medici authority and the ambition of Pope Clement VII, who was determined to restore his family to power in their ancestral city. Pope Clement VII, after enduring his own harsh imprisonment during the sack of Rome, made a crucial alliance with his former captor, Emperor Charles V. The Treaty of Barcelona, signed in June 1529, stipulated that Charles V would crush the Florentine Republic and restore the Medici to power in exchange for papal coronation and support. For the Florentines, this meant a fight for their very existence as an independent republic. They knew the emperor's army, swelled by papal forces, would be overwhelming. The city mobilized for a desperate final stand. The Florentines began to construct new, formidable defenses. Under the guidance of skilled engineers, including the renowned Michelangelo Buonarroti, they built extensive earthworks, bastions, and trenches outside the traditional city walls. These modern fortifications were designed to withstand the era's heavy artillery. Every citizen was expected to contribute. The Florentine militia, largely composed of shopkeepers, artisans, and farmers, was drilled for combat. The city rallied around the ideal of Republican liberty, preparing for a long and bloody siege. The imperial and papal forces, numbering over 40,000 men under the command of Prince Philibert of Orange, surrounded Florence in October 1529. The siege began with relentless bombardment. Giant cannons positioned on the surrounding hills rained down stone balls and iron shot on the city, shaking buildings and tearing apart defenses. The Florentines, though outnumbered, fiercely resisted. They launched daring sallies, desperate attacks on enemy positions outside the walls, hoping to disrupt the besiegers, gather intelligence, and inflict casualties. These skirmishes were often brutal, fought hand-to-hand in the muddy trenches and fields. One of the most celebrated figures of the defense was Francesco Ferrucci, a Florentine military commander who led a small, mobile force outside the city. He conducted a brilliant guerrilla campaign, disrupting imperial supply lines and attempting to bring relief to Florence. His exploits instilled hope in the besieged, but his forces were eventually cornered, and Ferrucci was killed in a climactic battle at Gavinana in August 1530, a devastating blow to Florentine morale. Inside Florence, the long siege began to take its inevitable toll. Food supplies, despite careful rationing, dwindled. The population, swelled by refugees from the surrounding countryside, began to suffer from severe hunger. People ate horses, mules, and anything else they could find. The disease, as always during prolonged sieges, became a deadlier enemy than the imperial cannons. Typhus, dysentery, and plague swept through the crowded city, claiming thousands of lives. The streets filled with the sick and the dying, and the public health system collapsed under the immense pressure. The defenders, weakened by hunger and disease, continued to man the walls and fight. They showed incredible resilience, driven by a deep-seated hatred for the Medici and a desire to preserve their republic. But internal divisions also plagued the city. Some influential families, weary of the suffering and fearful of complete destruction, began to secretly negotiate with the besiegers. This internal dissent weakened the city's resolve at a crucial moment. By August 1530, after 10 grueling months, Florence was on its knees. Its defenses were shattered in places, its population decimated, and its last hope of relief, Francesco Ferrucci, was dead. With no supplies, no outside help, and rampant disease, the Florentine leadership recognized the inevitable. They were forced to capitulate. On August 12, 1530, Florence surrendered. The terms of surrender, dictated by Pope Clement VII and Emperor Charles V, were severe. The Republic was abolished, and Alessandro de' Medici, an illegitimate son of Lorenzo, Duke of Urbino, was installed as the first Duke of Florence. This marked the end of Florence's long and often tumultuous Republican history and the beginning of Medici dynastic rule that would last for over 2 centuries. The brutal siege of Florence was a crushing blow, a final desperate gasp of a dying republic against the overwhelming power of a Medici Pope and a Holy Roman Emperor, ensuring the Medici's absolute return and forever reshaping the political landscape of Tuscany.